So, welcome back to another episode of On Air with Phoenician Hunter and 369 Lumineer. Welcome, Phoenician Hunter.
Hello, it's good to be back.
It's great to be back, and today's episode's very interesting for me. I'm heavily invested in this topic. It's episode 17, titled Aboard the Citizenship. Every person is a man, but not every man a person. And it's based off the back of your amazing article, well-researched article. And it also ties into your book, which, again, I encourage our listeners to download, subscribe, because it is absolutely amazing reading.
Yeah, this was my first post that can be considered a direct sequel to my book, The Secret World of Words, where I demonstrated the maritime character of the English language. And for those who haven't read the book, I always noted, and other researchers have noted, that the English language contains many words relating to nautical, sea, water, shipping and navigation. And I was inspired by other researchers like Jordan Maxwell. He's probably the most well-known to talk about this topic. He kept referring to certain words and their connection to water and commerce. And just touching on Jordan Maxwell, whenever I mention him or post a clip, it really gets certain people really upset. He really has a way of upsetting, especially I found Christians. Now, just because I post something from another researcher, or even if I quote another researcher, it doesn't mean I agree with everything that they have to say. But in certain things, I agree with him. And I don't believe, unlike some people, I don't just take it on face value, and I just don't believe it without actually doing my own research. And I do. I always go and do my own. He makes claims, and I go and research them. The thing with Jordan Maxwell, he never actually gives you any sources or notes. He will make some claims, and that's it. He doesn't provide any sources. You got to go look for them. And maybe this is what upsets a lot of people. I'm not sure, but.
With Jordan Maxwell in particular, because I'm familiar with him, but the thing that I see is that what he says makes, in some weird, wonderful way, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I've had the same take on what he says. There are some things that I don't agree with. He does have this whole side of him about the reptilians and aliens and that stuff, which I don't sort of, take too seriously. But everything he has said about law, words, commerce, religion, which upsets a lot of people, from my research, has always been pretty much spot on. But you got to dig. You got to go and do your own research. You got to be prepared to dig, and you'll find the references to what he's talking about.
Maritime admiralty versus common law, for example.
Yeah, everything he has said, I have found references for. So, this is what has led to me writing my book to begin with, and taking it a step further and seeing, okay, so where do these words lead? What is the purpose of them? And, I wanted to understand why these spellings were inserted in the language to begin with, and then who actually was behind it, who cast the spells.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because I think it's prudent for us to, at the very, very onset, is to define the word spelling or spell. And you've raised this in your article. And from my understanding, based on what I've read with your stuff and others, is that the term spell, okay, we're taught in school spelling, this is what we're going to do. The word spell is generally used for magic, which can cause harm or force people to do something against their will. Unlike charms, for example, which are there for healing, protection, etc.
There's a difference in the words that they use to describe, the meanings behind the words. So what I found was this water terminology is present from the moment you're born. So in the English language, for example, when you were born, you come down your mother's birth canal, right? So we're coming through water. Again, it's the whole water theme. We are then issued a birth certificate signed by a doctor.
Yes.
So now, in nautical terms, then we can say a birth, which is spelt slightly differently. Instead of an I, you got an E, but the way you pronounce the word is exactly the same.
Yeah.
So berth is a space where a vehicle can be docked for loading or uploading. Okay, so when a ship berths in a dock or a port, the captain has to produce what is called a birth certificate.
Yes.
Okay, the same words, we're using the same terminology to describe two different events. Then a product is shipped from a warehouse to its destination. Now we say shipped, even if it's been transported by other means, like cars or aeroplane. We still use the word shipped. So these are all in there for a reason. They're not there by accident. And then we find that the word captain comes from capital. And capital is money or currency.
That's right.
So there's a lot more examples that I give in the article, and but it's just to set the scene basically. And there's even more in my book. If anyone wants to understand where I'm going with this article, it's prudent to read the book first.
Of course. But what I would like to know, and this is probably a question that a lot of our listeners have, is that, what do all these words and terms have to do with us in the modern day?
Well, exactly. And I came to that same thinking when I was hearing other people talk about this stuff, like Jordan Maxwell, for instance. I go, so what about it? Who cares? How does this impact me? And it does. And so simply put, in legal terms, the merchants, what they've done is they've changed you or us, they've changed you into money, into a valuation of mammon, and into a ship or vessel of commerce for its use. That's why we have all the nautical terminology.
Yeah.
Now, this was done because, this is what my research has uncovered. This was done because merchants or people cannot inhabit or claim your soul or spirit. So they have to take legal possession over your body or your material. They can't take it over your spirit or your soul. So if they can control your body, then that is enough for them. So now this is done through what? The manipulation of language, and that's why we find it in the words and the spellings. But you can look at it another way. Spellings, what are they? What are words? Then you look into their vibrations. So they're doing it through vibrations. Okay, and I get into that in my book as well. So the merchants, the word merchant is water. And if you break that up, it's water chanters. So they have cast a spell, a water enchantment over mankind.
Merchants, water chanters. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
merchants.
Yeah.
So and again, I cover that more in the book. So it all came together when I saw this quote from the Bible. The Bible is trying to tell you things, people, but not the way most people read it. They're metaphors. They're trying to tell you something. And my favorite quote from the Bible is, "For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived." Pretty much telling you there what they've done, what the merchants have done to deceive everyone by their sorcery, and magic.
Okay, and this ties in seamlessly to, I guess, the quote in your article that relates to that. If you can just if I can entertain people and just read it, because it's going to set the scene for where this discussion goes. This imaginary fact or legal existence is called citizenship, where we conduct ourselves in mammon as commercial people, as corporations, under the law of agency in international admiralty or maritime law. And this is also known as the law of merchants, the law merchant, under which we are acting in the capacity of merchants upon this fictional, legal sea of commerce in virtual ships called public citizens.
So they've made us into a vessel, because if they've made the world a sea of commerce. So now it doesn't matter if you're on land and you're on the sea. Okay. Now people say, oh yeah, there's laws of the land is separate to the laws of the sea. It doesn't cover everything. For instance, you can have customs and laws of the people that are on land, but what they've done is anything to do with commercial activities, it covers land-based commercial activities as well. So they put it in legal terms by saying maritime law also covers land-based commercial activities that are maritime in character. So then if you act in the capacity of a vessel by conducting trade and commerce, you are subject to its laws. So maritime law or admiralty law covers all commercial activities, land-based or sea-based. It doesn't matter. Okay, this is where they got you. This is where they've tricked you.
Okay, which is why if people are deep into, the social media aspect, and when people start talking about common law, you have every right, and we're not going to go into too much of this detail, but if you are pulled over driving by the police, for example, you can say that you are a sovereign citizen and you are not engaging in commercial activities. And I've seen this go through the courts where the defendant has won based on that fact. So what you're saying is right on the money. But my big question, or in this instant, is, can you explain what money or currency is if we're talking
Yeah.
about corporations?
Okay, just going back to your point first, I've seen a lot of people get that wrong too with that common law
Of
stuff, and they
course.
end up in friggin' jail. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm not encouraging anyone to do that stuff because a lot of them get it wrong, and I think maybe where a lot of people win the case or get off are sort of given like a free pass. This has happened to me where I got a fine and I disputed they let you go the first time. It's almost okay. Okay, it's your first offence, and we'll let you go. Now people think they've won and they've cheated the system. No, what they've done is they've given you, they've let you off the first time like a warning, so you don't have to pay the fine.
Mm.
But the more, if you this is they'll get you on the second one or the third one. This is what I'm trying
Well,
to say.
can
There are
I?
things like that you got to be careful about. We'll get into it later, but it has to do
Of
with
course.
claim and counterclaim, and we'll
Yes.
discuss that further down the
Yeah.
track. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's we'll uncover common law and maritime law.
Okay. So let's leave that for later in the discussion, which I
Yeah.
think is going to be very interesting. But explain to me money or
Okay.
currency.
Okay, so we'll look at that word and that thing that we call money or currency. Okay, so everything in the world that we live in currently, everything is valued in money. And money is just a representation of time because we add value with our time and energy. That's why when you get a job and you sign a contract with an employee, it's stipulated how many hours you're going to work, right, for a certain amount of money, right?
Yes.
It's money at the end of the day, okay?
Mm.
That gives value. So time is the measure of duration, and this makes time the essence of contract,
Yeah.
according to law. And this is simply man's attempt, so the merchant's attempt to control the flow of time. Okay, this is important. They're trying to control time, which we call currency, like the current of the commercial sea. That's
Of
why,
course.
is connected to the sea of commerce, right?
Okay, so in your article, based on this, you mention a few things, and in my evaluation, this may explain the origins of the ancient worship of the god Saturn or Kronos, which in ancient Greek is literal translation in time, chronos, time. So which is the personification of time.
Yeah, and that's where we get the word chronology from as well,
Okay.
time. So yeah, I found that, if they're so obsessed with the control of time, maybe this is where, the real reason behind the Jewish Sabbath comes from. And they call the Sabbath the day of holiness and rest,
Mm.
which is, observed on their Saturday or Saturn's day,
Yes.
right? So the word rest literally means to stop or cease from working, right? Taking time out.
Okay.
So I just thought maybe that's where it comes from, their holy day, because as we all know, they're connected with commerce and the merchants, and I think we discussed it on the previous podcast.
Yes.
This is important as well, that time is also cycles. Don't forget that we've discussed that in many other podcasts and articles, especially in regard to astronomy and astrology. So
Astrology. That's right.
a lot of these merchants historically were, the priest class as well, and they were looking at the stars and they were into astronomy and astrology, and that's where all that comes from as well, because they're looking into time cycles. Now, the reason they're important is because this allows the merchants to make accurate predictions, thereby creating wealth. Because if you can predict what's coming, weather-wise, bad weather, good weather, when you're going to have a good crop, when you're not going to have a good crop,
Mm.
or when is the best time to invest in this resource or this other resource, and
Yeah.
it even extends further to that in regards to people's behaviour. We found in our discussions in previous podcasts that these cycles affect the minds and thoughts of people as well. So they can
Mm.
predict when people are going to feel a certain way or when they're going to think a certain way.
And I'm glad you've
So
raised this because just to call out to our listeners is that they can listen to this pod or these podcasts at a YouTube channel, which is On Air Podcast 2025, all hyphenated. The episodes are called The Power of God and Time is Money. And it's actually quite an interesting discussion, and I recall it quite clearly. And it's very good to listen to that.
we also
Sure.
covered it a little bit in another one, which was the Trump card as well, and
That's
what
right.
the whole purpose of Trump getting in at this particular time, again, time.
Mm.
See, a lot of things that they do, the manipulators or whatever you want to call them, the elites or whatever,
Mm.
is based on a certain time of the cycle.
Yeah.
That's when they implement certain things. When is the right time to do it? When isn't it the right time to do it? Is this the time for Trump? And we went through that in that podcast as well. So yeah, I just wanted to raise
Cycles
that.
and stuff. No, no, very, very good
Yeah.
point. But you mentioned in your article the connection between money or currency and the sea. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so this is another important thing that I found. So why is it connected to water? Okay, why does it need to be connected to the sea and currency and the flow of water? And it's because in order to control the flow of currency, right, the greatest empires, whatever you want to call them, states and companies throughout history have always known that you must have dominance of the sea in
Yes.
order to have dominance of an economy. This was known and this was done by the Phoenicians, Genoa, Venice, the Dutch with their
East
Dutch
India.
East India Company,
Yep, yep.
then after that the British East India Company, all at some point of the height of their power had dominion of the sea. It goes hand in hand. You own the sea, you own the ports. You own the ports, you own the trade. You own the trade, then you own the shipping. It
You own the
has to,
shipping,
you
you own
have
the
to have,
wealth. Yeah,
yeah, you can't have one without the other. They go
yeah,
hand in hand. Yeah.
yeah.
So and this is why also that the British Empire always insisted on having the best navy, and this allowed them to become the most powerful and wealthiest nation for centuries. Other powers like France probably concentrated on a land military. France probably had the strongest land-based military. Even Germany during World War One and World War Two, but during those periods, Britain still maintained the strongest navy. They still had command of the sea. So they'll always going to come out on top eventually. It's vital.
And there's a quote to that point, and I'll
Right.
paraphrase here. It's the use and control of the sea is but one link in the chain of exchange by which wealth accumulates, but it is, after all, the central link.
Yeah, like we were saying, it's the vital link. And it's something that a lot of historians miss. But, there are naval historians who've always maintained that is, you want to beat your opponents, you want to beat the world's superpower, that's what you have to, you have to have a strong navy. There's no other way around it. And today, that is the reason why America is still the strongest and wealthiest nation in the world. No one's sort of getting close to that
Yeah.
in terms of their naval power. So, if you want to see the power base shift, look towards the Navy, look towards who's building a bigger a Navy and who's, declining in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, that's why today also the United States maintains somewhere around 750 bases in, I don't know, at least 80 countries worldwide, which is almost every country in the world.
That's a jaw-dropping stat, I must say.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
again,
that's why they're everywhere. And, people, they're not, we've discussed this before as well, they're not there to spread democracy and world peace,
that's
okay?
right. Yeah.
Even though that's what they promote, they say that. They're not there for that reason, people.
Yeah.
And, we discussed that in Why Fascism and I think the Pilgrims as well.
Yeah.
Look into those. I have found that democracy is the merchant's preferred system of government. That's why it's been pushed. That's why it's not to help us. It's not to help people. It's to maintain this dominance of markets and trade, okay, in their hands. That's why they push it. So since the end of World War II, the US Navy has had what is termed command of the sea, where pretty much you're dominant and you dominate the seas. And this has allowed, again, this has allowed the US to become the world's wealthiest nation. So they go
Yeah.
hand in hand.
Well, and this brings me on to my next question. I'd like your input in because again, in this particular topic, I've dived in fairly deep, and I know a lot about how these corporations work. But in your article, you mention BlackRock, which, for people's edification, that grew out of the first Boston Corporation. So BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, which are the three wealth funds that we always talk about.
The wealth of privately owned joint stock companies is what they are, eventually surpassed those of nation states. And this was due to the maritime nature of their activities. So if you look at history, we went from small city states like Phoenicia or Venice, which was just a small city, Genoa. Then we moved on from there to the maritime republics that became empires, and then from empires like the Spanish Empire and the British Empire, and then from there we moved on to what we call the trade companies, which were the British East India Company, and don't forget that became even bigger than the British Empire
Yeah.
in terms of their standing army and their naval force was bigger than the nation's army. So,
Yeah.
you can see where the power has shifted. And now today, it's these investment firms that you mentioned. So the wealth has been transferred from them to these firms. And I think, again, we've mentioned this before in other talks that,
We have a couple of weeks ago.
yeah, right. So these are the largest multinational investment companies, right? And these are all US corporations. So
Mm.
part of the US system. And these three firms are the major shareholders in 95% of the S&P 500 companies, which are the 500 largest companies in the world. So they
Yeah.
own 95% of them, which
Yeah.
is
It's
ridiculous.
crazy.
Okay. So that power is not going to shift anytime soon. One can say that the use and control of the sea is and has been the most important factor in the history of the world. And there's an old saying that goes, the sea lanes were and are the true roads of empire. So you control the seas, you control the roads of the empire.
Yeah, and that leads on to, again, another section of your article which states that the sea remains the cornerstone of today's global system, in that 95% of trade that crosses international boundaries is essentially waterborne, and the obvious is not always evident. And continued from that, according to the United Nations Trade and Development, I think it was around 2020 that maritime transport accounted for roughly 80% of all international trade.
Even today, where most people might think that trade is conducted by sea or land-based transportation, well, it's still the same today as it always has been.
Mm.
The sea still dominates. It's still, like you just said, 80% is still of international trade is still conducted through
Yeah,
maritime transport. So
and it's
it's
all
it's just as important. That's not going to change. It hasn't changed unless some kind of new technology allows otherwise.
well. So Walter Raleigh, which again you mentioned in your article, he quoted that for who, and this is a direct quote, and I'll read it: "For whosever commands the sea commands the trade. Whosever commands the trade of the world commands the riches of the world, and consequently the world itself." So my question is, who are the merchants in control today?
That quote by the English statesman, who I think was an advisor to the British Crown,
Yep.
they knew what was at play. They knew how to dominate the world, and that was through command of the sea and trade. And that's why they always, like I said, I'm repeating myself, and that's why it was so important for them to have a strong navy.
Mhm.
And likewise, America, and we've discussed this before, that I see America as just an extension of the British Empire, or more accurately, the extension of the East India Company,
Yep.
which I believe was probably morphed into what we know as the American corporation. I don't like calling it a nation because I don't think it ever has been.
Sure.
I think its purpose from the beginning was what it is today, and that was to be this global maritime law power. Okay, so when you say who are the merchants in control today, I look towards America. The evidence is there that they control the seas, they control the wealth, they are the wealthiest country,
Mm.
they have the strongest navy, they have bases all over the world.
Mhm.
So this tells me they've got dominion of the sea, they've got command of the sea, and this is why they spread democracy around the world. Because again, as we've discussed, this helps their system. This is their system. Democracy is the system of merchants, because in democracy, and people should listen to why fascism, if they want to understand that better, is that democracy allows for international trade, and it allows for international trade to be controlled by foreigners in any country. So that's why they push it. America is upholding what I would call maritime law. So they're in command of this system at the moment. But we need to understand that it didn't originate with them. And as we've discussed, power shifts. Now, this is another thing that bothers me about a lot of people and researchers is, oh, the Jesuits run the world. So, if the Jesuits started around the 1500s. I don't know who was running it before them, or someone else, or maybe they don't think anyone ran the world before the Jesuits. So according to them, the Jesuits have been running it for 500 years,
Right.
or, whatever, it's the Jews running it, or it's Rome running it, or what's wrong with it shifting?
Mm.
Power shifts. You look at Russia today, look how much land they had under the Soviet Union, how much power and influence. They don't have the same degree of power today, do they? Nazi Germany, during their peak, controlled most of Europe. You know what I mean? It shifts. It's evident it shifts, and it's evident that powers rise and fall. But some people want to believe that it's this power that has been in control since the dawn of time.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
what to say to you. Yeah, back to what you were saying about who is in control today. I just wrote a recent post called "Law of the Rhodians," where I traced maritime law back to the island of Crete, which Crete is a Greek island,
Hmm.
and where most historians say that the first civilization in Europe arose.
Mm.
So that's where they trace civilization in Europe, and I get into details about Crete in that article. What I show is that the dominion of the sea, as it's called, or ownership of the sea, has changed hands many times. So, from Crete to Phoenicia to Rome to other Greek states to Britain, and currently it's the USA. So
Mm.
it didn't originate with America. They're just holding the torch of liberty. They're holding the torch
At,
currently,
at this point
and
in
that
time,
might
yeah.
pass on to someone else.
The USA is in control at this point in time.
Yeah.
Your definition of changing hands has happened over millennia, and it will continue to happen unless something drastic changes.
Yeah, and something important is to remember is that when we talk about, moving from Crete to Phoenicia to Rome or wherever,
Mm.
let's not forget that the merchants move with the empires.
Yeah.
So perhaps at the very top, maybe that certain merchant families or remain consistent. Maybe it's them moving, small little group are moving from Crete to Phoenicia, and then moving from Phoenicia to Rome, and then from
Mm.
Rome to Britain, and then whatever. Maybe they stay consistent, but the nations that they use change for one reason or another. Maybe they've used the resources there to their capacity, or they want to expand, or there's another reason for them to move. Maybe they're finding they're being exposed, or they're under threat or something.
Yeah. I've got a question that I want to ask you, but as an aside, you mentioned
Yeah.
the Dutch and the British East India Company earlier. If people want to have a look at a historical view of that, there's a great series from 2017 with Tom Hardy, where it revolves around the British East India Company called Taboo. It's from 2017, but it's absolutely
Oh, I
amazing.
haven't seen that.
There's a short
Didn't even
history
know about it.
lesson. Oh no, it's fantastic. I'm not sure whether it's on Netflix or Apple. It's one of those paid streaming services, but it's called Taboo. It was done in 2017, and Tom Hardy is the main character, and obviously a brilliant actor. But that's as an aside, just as a history
That's good.
lesson.
That brings up an interesting point too, and that's maybe why we've done these podcasts, is because not everyone reads or has time
That's
or
right.
is interested in reading, and that's why you suggested that we do podcasts, because we're reaching a different audience who don't have, like I said, the time or the love of reading.
That's right. And with your research, and remember, we need to remind our listeners that your research doesn't happen overnight. This is like, one article will take you anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks to research, to gather insights and to develop a finished piece. So in a lot of ways, you're fast tracking that history lesson.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
but nevertheless, based on what you said about the merchant families moving with the times, let's say moving with the empires, my question: why are they doing this? Is money, power, control their ultimate motive?
Many people, especially, I mean, because I cop a lot of pushback by Christians, right? Now, they would
Mm.
say, and many have said this, that this is all the work of Satan and the
Mm.
devil and Lucifer, and his minions and evil people. Like, these people are possessed and they've got no control over themselves, and they're doing it because they're evil and they're Satanists and
Mm.
sacrifice and all that stuff. I think we have to look beyond that. From my research, I would say that there is a deep spiritual aspect to all of this, okay?
Yeah.
Not a harmful one, but it might be perceived as harmful, because
Mm.
Well, when you think of lessons that, you learn in life, or your parents teach you lessons, harsh lesson, or, you get smacked, how do you feel? You feel angry, you hate them, you
Yeah.
think they're evil. At some level, they're trying to teach us a lesson, a hard lesson for us to learn, and it makes us uncomfortable. There are a few ways to look at it. So another way to look at it is that they've built their civilization, so according to them, they own it.
Mm.
Okay, so that's maybe one way of looking at it. And the other lesson is about, like I said, they're trying to teach us a lesson or two. So one of these lessons is about ownership. Do we really own anything, or are we just using it? And this goes, back to what you were saying earlier about common law. Okay, so perhaps they don't want us to own anything because they are sort of like guardians for future generations, so other generations can use them and enjoy them as well, right?
Mm.
So if you were to own something, you're keeping it, you're not giving it, you're not sharing it. So there's sort of like the role of a guardian. Again, that gets into the court system and the fictional name
Yeah,
and the right of use over ownership. So, and going into court and making what they call counterclaims. So
that's right.
when you go to court, so you've been given a name, a fictional name, okay, which is registered to them, right? Your straw man.
You're straw man. That's right.
They have claimed ownership over that name, okay? And anything that that name generates in terms of money or material. So when you go to court, the first thing that you've been asked is what your name is, and you say, yeah, that's me.
Mm.
You're already making a claim. You're making a counter claim against them because that is their name, not yours. Okay, and you're saying, yes, that's me. What you need to say is that you're using that name, or I'm known to use that name,
Yeah.
respond to that name.
Or
Okay.
I am the representative of the clan of whatever it is. That way, you're acting as a true person, not a corporation.
So the whole ownership thing is really interesting because then it throws into question the whole, are you your body or you your spirit, and do you own your body, or is that a vessel as well?
Yep.
And is
Yep.
that vessel just there for use for your soul or your spirit? So it gets quite deep, and maybe they're trying to make us look at it in that from that way point of view.
Yep.
Another lesson is we're here, and what do most people do on the planet? They're accumulating wealth, pursuit of material things. And maybe they're trying to tell us that, the material things or pursuits are not what we're here to do, or maybe
Yeah. They
they're
don't matter.
stopping
Yeah.
you from reaching a divine state or something. Don't fall into the trap of it's the devil, it's always evil. Lessons are hard. They're gonna make you uncomfortable, and that's what lessons are there for. You
Sure.
know,
Sure.
you know. Someone once said to me that perhaps your parents aren't always there to teach you the best or correct way to live your life. Maybe you've had shitty parents.
Yeah.
Maybe in some kind of way they're showing you how not to be, how not don't be like them. So
Yeah.
that again is that's another lesson. It's a bad lesson, and we're not all privileged to have great parents, that
Of
guide
course.
us in the correct way. So,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, look, it's again another interesting look at maritime law, how words have affected us, particularly in the English language. Can I just ask for some closing statements from you?
Yeah, okay. Going back to this class of merchants, and I think they sort of have a hand in media, film, music, everything. It extends to the reality of everything that we consume, and
Mm.
they actually put a lot out there to tell you what's going on too, but we miss it. We miss it, and a great film for people to watch to understand maritime law and all the hidden messages is The Truman Show with
Yeah.
Jim Carrey. I don't know if
Mm.
you've seen that, but
Oh,
watch that with fresh eyes.
that's a classic movie that I think most people in the world have seen it, and those that are, let's say, awakening in this point in time always refer to that and The Matrix as the two movies that really
Yeah,
stand out.
Matrix is another one. So in the Truman Show, the show's creator is named Christ of, so Christo.
Yeah, Cristo.
So
Yeah,
Christ of, the artificial construct is called, Sea Haven. See,
yeah,
we're back, and True Man, the True Man. His surname is Burbank. Bank can mean, like, bank in terms of money, or
sure.
the river bank.
Yep.
Again, it's all nautical words there. The main point of that show is that he lives in this fictional world, which he's becoming aware of, that it's not real, it's not
Mm.
reality, but he's too afraid to do anything about it. He's too afraid to let it go and to escape that reality. And and one of his biggest fears in the film is overcoming his fear for water,
That's
because
right.
they
He wanted
created this story that his father drowned or something.
to
What was it? I
scare
can't-
him, and he wanted
Yeah,
the moment he realised where he was, he wanted to book a trip to Fiji.
yeah, yeah.
And look, it's actually quite hilarious as the way he does that in true Jim Carrey style. But
That's
again, like you
right.
said, it's in plain sight,
It
and
is.
that movie had. I think was done by design to wake people
Yes.
up, which is why
Yeah.
people resonate to it.
Yeah, and then in the final scene, which was perfect, he's walking up these flight of steps,
Stairs, yeah, yeah.
you know, stairs, but it's the backdrop is clouds, so it's like he's walking up heaven, up the clouds to heaven, and there's a door there. Before he exits he makes his grand exit from the stage, from the theater, from this illusion, he puts his arms out, stretched out, like he's doing the sign of the
The
cross.
crucifixion.
Yes, crucifixion, because he's made the ultimate sacrifice. He's left the world behind.
Yeah.
You see, that fake reality. He's sacrificed everything there. He left his wife, his so-called, reality TV wife, his friends. He left it all behind to make that ultimate sacrifice. There's something they're trying to tell us, people. Yeah, I just want to sign off and say, anyone interested in maritime law, I've actually got a few posts that cover that in detail. So the first one, like we said, was my book, The Secret World of Words, How the English Language is Used to Control and Manipulate You. Then I've got one called Merchant's Tongue, The Rise of the English Language. And that sort of gets into, them inserting these words and manipulating the language to suit this merchant class. And then the next one is the one we're discussing today, which is Aboard the Citizenship.
Yeah.
And then there was most recent one, which was Law of the Rhodians, which goes back to the origins of the dominion of the sea.
And
So yeah, there's a
you
few
mentioned
there.
that earlier. And if I can direct people to your Substack channel, which is phoenicianhunter.substack.com, and also to listen to all previous 16 podcasts that we've produced, you can go to youtube.com/on air podcast 2025, all hyphenated. And that will give you a great little history lesson based on your articles. So they basically go hand in hand. So thanks for your time again. It's always an interesting discussion. It's great to have you, and I look forward to our chat next week.
Likewise.
And just to have a little bit of a tie-in, in the words of Truman Burbank, in case we don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.